Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week we'll be discussing Black Sails. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
I'm Maddie, she's Kelsey, but we're not alone this week. It's a rarity.
We have a guest. Very exciting. We're joined in this episode by Clara Cook from the Tales We Tell podcast. Clara was kind enough to have us on her podcast. I think that episode aired in July of 2022.
Has it been that long? Wow.
Time goes by really, really quickly. So we are super happy to return the favor, I guess, and have Clara with us today. You know, we went back and forth about what episode she might be joining us on and landed on Black Sails. Clara, do you want to say anything else to introduce yourself?
Oh, just hello, and thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. Been a big fan of the show for a long time now, listened to all the episodes, and so I'm very excited to be a guest. I'm very excited to be talking about Black Sails as well, which is a TV series which I think is excellent and didn't really get the coverage and the acclaim that I think it should have got at the time. Yeah, just that it fits very well with my interests, which are in gender and sexuality in television.
And pirates and history.
And pirates and history. And also, like I was saying to you before we recorded, I think I spend a lot of time in fictional spaces that are dominated by men.
Yeah,
like the
as
stories,
we all do, I think.
You know, so like pirates, cowboys, men in space, men in ancient Greece. I think I grew up on a diet of stories about men, so pirates was always fitting into that as well. It's just why I've always been interested in pirates. So this fit in really well.
Excellent. We're super happy to have you here. So should we introduce Black Sails and what the whole deal with it is?
Yeah.
We normally would talk about a main ship, but in this case, there's a lot going on in the show and a lot of characters going on in the show. So I think we will talk a little bit about who all these characters are and what broadly the show is about before we get into the ships.
But in terms of the sources that we're looking at, it is, as we said, the show Black Sails. It aired on Starz from 2014 to 2017. And all three of us have seen all of it. So...
So to get into the characters, obviously we've said it's a pirate show. It is sort of half and half real life pirates and fictional pirates from Treasure Island. So it serves as kind of a prequel to the novel Treasure Island. And the characters we have in it are Captain Flint, Long John Silver, Lord Thomas Hamilton, Miranda Hamilton, Max, Eleanor Guthrie, Calico Jack, and Charles Vane, Maddie, and Billy Bones. It's a huge crew.
So, like Maddie was saying, it's sort of a prequel to Treasure Island, but where we are in time and space in the world is we're with a group of pirates towards the end of what's called the golden age of piracy in Nassau and what is now the Bahamas. And basically, like, the plot of the show is in the first couple of seasons, they're going after this big treasure this boat ship, a Spanish ship that has a lot of gold in it, with the hopes that they are going to be able to use that gold to maintain their independence from colonial powers. And then as the show sort of progresses, there's a lot of back and forth between whether or not they're going to fight the colonial powers to maintain their independence, maybe use the gold to do that, or ask for pardons and try to reintegrate back into the larger colonial society. So that's sort of like the overarching framework of the 4 seasons of the show. But in terms of the queer content of the show, where do we start out?
Well, there's lots and lots of it, but it sort of changes over the course of the show. But we do begin with some lesbians. The characters Eleanor and Max, very early on into the show, are revealed to be in a relationship with each other. It sort of, continues over a bunch of episodes. There's betrayal. Things fall apart over the course of season 1. But in terms of the context of the show, I think it's viewed by many as a little bit exploitative. The scenes between the two of them are, numerous and somewhat graphic, I guess. This is at a period of the show in season 1 when in my mind, they were really trying to compete with Game of Thrones. There was a lot of sex on screen, and a fair amount of it was lesbians in a, titillate the masses sort of context. But that does change over the course of the show. So what else happens in queer storylines?
So I think one of the key things that happens, and we can make some space to talk about this, is season 1, there's a lot of female nudity. There's a lot of what feels sort of exploitative. And that tapers off altogether, I think, as the show continues on. But in season 2, we learned something really important. So, like we said, it's a huge ensemble cast, but if there is a main character, it's Captain James Flint. And he is the one on a mission to really get this goal, to maintain independence. There's something going on in his past. We see some kind of odd interactions with other characters in the show. And in season 2, they start to tease that out more. And we learn that his primary motivation in life is that he fell in love with a man, Lord Thomas Hamilton, and had that ripped away from him. And so, we start off the show with your classic titillating lesbians, and then it's revealed like, oh no, it's been a gay romance the entire time that's at the center of the show.
This manly pirate was gay all along? It's a shock.
Yeah, and I think that the love story between James and Thomas is it's portrayed in quite a romantic way as well, compared to, say, for instance, I think when I first watched the show, I took issue with the fact that they were showing explicit sex scenes between lesbians, but they weren't showing explicit sex scenes between Thomas and James. But I think now, in hindsight, looking back on it, I think that it's filmed and acted in such a way that they appear tender and sort of loving, subverting all the portrayals that we have in media of gay men appearing as promiscuous or predatory. So I think they were really trying to show homosexuality as this loving, equal relationship between them. I know that Thomas Hamilton is aristocracy and James McGraw is not aristocracy, but they are being portrayed as equals intellectually and I guess emotionally. So, and for most of the show, most of season 1, you are wondering why is Flint doing what he's doing? It's going beyond maintaining independence. There's an element of ruthlessness, and he's doing these things that are so ruthless and to the point where things that you really can't go back on, making decisions you can't change.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, killing his quartermaster, who he's good friends with.
Spoilers are allowed on this show, but he kills who is kind of his best friend at
who's
the time.
And who's a character that you root for, who you like. You like his quartermaster, he's a decent man.
Flint likes him too.
Yeah, and making these decisions, which just seem so destructive, he's being driven by something, he's so filled with rage against the English. And this is why. This is why. It's all because of Thomas.
In the first season, he also has this sort of baffling relationship with a woman who we know as Mrs. Barlow. She's living on the island. He comes to see her when he's there. There's clearly history between them. There's something going on. We do see them have sex, but it's kind of weird and fraught emotionally, and he
perfunctory.
He doesn't seem like he wants to be there, and you're like, what is this relationship? No one can understand it. We can't. There's rumblings among the crew about what's the deal with this woman. No one knows what's going on here. And then as we learn in season 2, she was actually the wife of Thomas Hamilton, and Flint had first been in a relationship with her, then had gotten together with her husband, and in everyone was cool with it kind of way. It wasn't a love triangle. And so there's all of this history of the two of them carrying the loss of Thomas and still being tied to each other as their only links to their past selves, because Flint has totally rebuilt himself. He wasn't even Flint in his previous life. He has created this pirate character. And so it's just such an interesting way to have it all come together in season 2. And you're like, oh, I totally understand what's going on now in a way that I didn't before.
And also makes for exceptionally good drama. The idea that this epic quest, this extreme thirst for revenge, is caused by a lost love, a really deep, deep love that you had for this individual, this character, this person, and it was lost, it's tragic, and it's being driven by the rage. I think it just makes it on the level of a Greek tragedy. I think it makes it great, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's cool because in season 1, it's is he just this awful pirate with a quest for power? And is that why he wants to do this? And then to get the reasons behind it makes him, even though he's done unforgivable things in season 1 that he will never forgive himself for, you at least are able to get why.
It sort of humanizes him, and I think it allows the audience to stick with him for the rest of the series, you know, because otherwise it'd be hard to root for him as a person.
Right.
It's worth saying, I think, to Clara's point, that it doesn't get super sexually explicit, but we do see them kiss. We do see them very explicitly say that they're in love with each other. Like, this is not a relationship where there is any ambiguity about the nature of it. So the show is very clear.
There's a lot of discussion of it too.
Yeah.
Flint and Miranda have conversations about, like, Miranda saying, you know, I loved Thomas, but what the two of you had was even more special, and you guys shared this thing that not a lot of people have. Talk about their love story pretty, you know, explicitly.
So Thomas has a book, and in the beginning of the book, like in the first page, he inscribes to James, my truest love, right? No shame. And then he writes his initials. So he calls him his truest love. I mean, you can't really... I think
It's hard to read that any other way, yeah.
Says it all. Says it all.
It really does.
Okay, so that's Flint and Thomas, but there are other queer characters in the show. There are other queer relationships going on, and we should talk a little bit about some of those. So in the show, there are a couple of characters, Calico Jack and Anne Bonny, who have been tied together, you know, many years. They're sort of a unit pirate pair, and Max comes into their lives, and Anne and Max begin a sexual relationship with each other. And then it becomes this interesting dynamic where Anne feels like she needs to explore this side of herself, but Anne and Jack also are still tied to each other. And so Jack is sort of like, if you feel like this is what you need to do, that's totally fine. It doesn't change our relationship to each other. And so there's this fascinating trio thing going on with the three of them.
Yeah, this is more, I'd say, of a love triangle, but the conflict doesn't quite play out the way you might predict. Like, it goes in interesting directions. And so I think what's interesting is, you know, we've established that Max had that relationship with Eleanor earlier, and so she's clearly interested in same-sex relationships. But this is a realization for Anne. She's clearly having an attraction to Max and feelings that she's having a hard time working through. And then she, you know, gives herself permission to experience that, and Jack does as well. And so, yeah, the loyalties end up playing out in interesting ways across the course of the show. But it still is not as love triangle-y and jealous as you might expect. And I think that speaks to the nature of pirates and their acceptance of these alternate sexualities, for lack of a better phrase.
We'll get into this, but I feel like this show mostly plays out in terms of relationships of three people. All of the main dynamics of the show are not necessarily like polyamorous romantic relationships, but like sets of three people who have this interesting tie to each other, and there's something about the three of them that is the relationship dynamic. And so that is one of them, but I don't feel like any of them play out the way you would think of a love triangle playing out, where there's one person who's like can't make up her mind if she wants to be with this guy or with this guy, and then there's tension between the guys, and eventually she'll figure out which one she wants to be with. Like, none of them play out that way.
So I don't think that the issue between Max, Jack, and Anne is a sexual one. So I don't think that Jack has a problem with Max and Anne having a sexual relationship. And I also don't think that Max really has a problem with them having like a threesome, a sexual experience as a threesome. So it's not, I think in a lot of traditional TV, it would be the sexual stuff that would be the problem.
Yeah.
I think the problem starts initially, I think, is that Jack feels that his intimacy, his emotional connection, his intimate bond with Anne could be disrupted by her feelings and her intimacy with Max. It's the emotions, it's the deep kind of connection between their personalities rather than the physical act. And I think that also comes into play when they actually are having a threesome in one of the scenes, and like Max and Jack's eyes meet over Anne's shoulders. I'm laughing because I could see this coming, and they kind of have this moment where they're both looking at each other, and Anne kind of looks up and she's like, what? Like she's kind of disturbed. She's like, what the hell's going on? And I think for her, she doesn't like the idea of anyone else having an emotionally intimate relationship with Jack. And I think that sometimes Anne shows some jealousy about Charles Vane having a close friendship with Jack. So with Jack and Anne, I think it's quite a possessive, codependent relationship. But I'm not sure that is actually to do with sex.
No, I mean, they certainly seem like they have had sex, but I think for the two of them, it's more about they have decided that this is the person that they will be more loyal to than anyone else. They are a unit, and if no one should be able to come between that. And so the tension early on between Jack and Max is her saying like, oh, I have this newfound power over Anne that you don't have because I'm giving her something that you can't give her. And Jack is there saying, you may think that now, but you're a new thing. And like our bond won't be disrupted by you because it is that strong. And then it's the sort of push and pull over how it affects both of those relationships going forward throughout the show.
So at one point, Anne says, I can't be your wife, but we'll be together till they put us in the fucking ground. And I think that's kind of indicative of their relationship. Like, they're going to be partners for life. But Anne doesn't fit into the traditional roles that perhaps maybe society would like to push her into. She wears men's clothes, or she wears masculine-looking clothes. She dresses like a man. And I think that she and Jack are real, amazingly kind of opposites of like what would be expected of characters in that time period. So she's like the taciturn defender. She's taking on the more male role. And Jack is the flamboyant, very talkative, nurturing individual, which would be a more female role. So for Anne, I feel like for her, she's sort of finding herself with Max in a way that she couldn't really find herself with Jack, I guess. She talks about that a bit. And I think that's quite a challenge to Jack, isn't it, really? Because he wants to maintain that. Their partnership is that economically they sort of depend on each other, and also for security and safety in terms of being pirates. And Max can intrude on that. So it's less about the sex, which I thought was interesting because I thought a stereotypical storyline in a TV series would be make it sexual jealousy. And there's no sexual jealousy there, I don't think.
But they've just been sort of everything to each other for so long. I think if there is an issue, it's that Jack wants to provide her everything. They want to be everything to each other. He wants to give her everything that she needs. And so he realizes he can't physically be the one to give her this. And I think that's why he's like, I obviously I grant you this relationship with Max if this is what you need. But he doesn't want that to mean that ultimately he will lose their depth of connection to each other, which can get complicated if her relationship with Max becomes emotional, which it does.
It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
So those are sort of the main queer relationships in the show, which is a pretty good amount. You know, for a show from this time period or even now. There's also a major non-canonical queer romance that the fandom has really latched onto that we want to mention as well. Mm-hmm. And that is Captain Flint and our good friend Long John Silver.
Long John Silver, such a silly nickname.
Yeah. So John Silver is sort of the beginning of the show. He becomes a member of Flint's crew after they've captured another ship. He has a piece of the map to the Spanish galleon that they're looking for. There's a lot of intrigue. Mm-hmm. But sort of over the course of the show, he bonds with Flint. He becomes more integrated into the crew, a more important member of the crew. Men start following him because he's such a good orator.
He's got the gift of gab.
Yeah. And he becomes the only character that Flint reveals that he was in this relationship with Thomas. He tells him he was in love with a man. And so there's definitely an interesting dynamic there. Now, he is also trying to get Silver to open up to him, and that doesn't really happen. Silver's pretty tight-lipped about where he came from and who he really is.
But in an interesting way, I think, where Silver also feels the intimacy of his relationship with Flint, and when he is pressed about his past, he sort of is like, I can't tell you. Like, it's like for him, that's something that he has completely written off. He's decided that's no longer a part of himself and he can't share it. And he's like, I hope this doesn't mean that it affects us, but there's nothing I can do. I can't tell you. And so Flint has to just accept that.
But I do think he opens up in all sorts of other ways. Like, sometimes in the series, Silver tells Flint stuff about what he's going to do when he really shouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes he reveals plots or he reveals ideas, or he talks very much about what he's thinking and how he's feeling about. They talk about their feelings a lot with each other.
A lot. Yeah.
You know, and sometimes in ways in which, like, right at that precise moment, it probably wouldn't be the best time to do this. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I think, I'm not saying there's not intimacy between them. I think, honestly, Flint and Silver are the main relationship of the show. Narratively, they're what bring you through the plot, and they're the closest in terms of the two people who they are close to each other, and they are the ones mostly affecting what's going on in the show. You're absolutely supposed to buy into the intimacy of their relationship. I think the interesting piece is Flint's whole thing is his history, right? What makes him is what has happened to him. That's why he's built this entire character for himself. It's why he's doing what he's doing, because of Thomas. That's his whole thing. And Silver is the opposite, where he's like, my history doesn't define me. I've decided my history is nothing to me, and I'm not even going to talk about it. It's done. And you as a viewer are supposed to be like, well, I guess that implies something really terrible happened to him and he doesn't want to talk about it. But I think it's hard for Flint to wrap his mind around you being like, I'm not my history, because Flint is his history exclusively. And it's an interesting difference between the two of them.
And then, interestingly, the last sort of set of beats of their relationship is as this war is heating up, the Spanish are getting involved, the British are coming in greater forces, things aren't going super well. Silver's also ended up in this relationship with a leader of a group of escaped slaves named Maddie, and he sort of ends up betraying them both. But the way he ends up betraying Flint is he discovers that Thomas, who they thought had died, is in fact alive and living in what is essentially like a prison camp in Georgia. And so he lets Flint know that and shuttles him up, and the show ends with Flint and Thomas reuniting. They get to be together in the end and have not like a super happy ending, but
it's very bittersweet, the finale of this show. Yeah. I think what's interesting to me about the way that Silver betrays, well, we should talk about Silver, Flint, and Maddie, because that's another one of our interesting trios in the show, where I think Maddie and Flint are extremely similar characters. They really see a lot of themselves in each other, and so it's interesting that Silver is drawn to them both. It's interesting how that all plays out. There's a point where Maddie is trying to give Silver some advice, and he's like, you sound like Flint, and she's like, is that a bad thing? Like, there's this thing interestingly tying them together. But the betrayal by Flint, they're getting to this point in the war where for him it's becoming clear, he thinks, that if they continue further, he could very likely lose either Maddie or Flint or both of them as things progress. And Flint and Maddie are both fine with that, right? Like the war is more important to them than the fact that they would live themselves. But Silver, who has never had people or relationships like this, clearly he's never had a home or anything that ties him to anyone else, has decided like he can't do that. He will destroy their war effort, and maybe neither of them will ever forgive him, but it will be worth it so that they will live. And so he has to live with that. And he does have, like, Flint tells him, you're going to regret it in their final scene with each other. And, you know, maybe you'll be able to keep Maddie, but even that's not going to be enough for you. And when he has this conversation with Maddie, it's not clear that she's going to be okay with it, because she's not even sure if he's killed Flint. Like, Flint is now gone, and she's been told this story that Flint is with Thomas, but she's like, sure, maybe that's what happened. Who knows? And so you're left in this place where it's like really unclear what Silver's relationship is going to be with either of them going forward. And so him making that choice, I think, is fascinating, where he's like, I am willing for you both to hate me as long as you are not dead. And he abandons the entire effort of the show in order to assure their safety. And so then, yeah, Flint ends up with Thomas, and you're like, well, it's happy that Thomas is alive, but also everything he's been trying to do for the last several years is over.
I do think that is kind of foreshadowed a couple of times. Big when Silver sort of asks Flint, like, would you give all this up if you could get Thomas back? But I think the problem is, I think Flint is too far gone by that point, and he's been so used to living without Thomas, and he thinks Thomas is dead. So there's no choice to be made. Whereas I think for Silver, it really is a choice. It's a big choice, isn't it? It's like,
well, he thinks he loses Maddie at one point, and that's what I think forces his hand.
And he's devastated. He's devastated. Yeah. Like he can't function at all, almost, really. And I sort of feel like that is a real act of love, is just to keep the people you love safe, even at the risk of them no longer loving you. Yeah. I mean, it's a real sort of,
I think everyone
heroic
in this
act,
trying to act out of love, right? Like Flint is too, but they're coming from different places and they have different ideas about what that means. So yeah, I absolutely think Silver does it because he loves them, but that doesn't mean it's not very painful for them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely.
It's really interesting. And then I love the bittersweetness of him getting Thomas back, but there being this, like, I don't think getting Thomas back erases the pain and rage of what has happened to him and how he feels about everything and why he has wanted to do what he's done. And so you can't imagine him just being like, okay, Thomas is alive, so I'm fine now. We'll just happily live quietly forever and I'll never think about this again.
Well, I mean, he's going to have to explain where Miranda is, and he's going to have to tell that story, and that's a very hard story for Thomas to hear, I'd imagine, because she didn't. So Miranda dies, and she doesn't die in the nicest way, and then she's kind of her dead body's paraded in front of a crowd in a town square. It's awful, and also he's going to have to kind of, I guess, relate the fact that he started a war and he killed a whole bunch of people. And
I think what's hard for him is he's going to have to tell him, like, who Flint is, who he's become, what he has created and what he has done and why, and dealing with the feelings
so much of his story thematically is about shame. And, like, you know, it's not clear that any of his shame has resolved. And he certainly gained some more shame as the show has gone along. So, yeah, you know, there could certainly be a sequel of, like, let's spend time resolving with...
Yeah, Flint Goes to Therapy is the sequel that I want to see. But yeah, the shame thing I think is interesting because that's a large part of why he's so mad. It's not just that British society took Thomas away from him and killed Thomas and ruined his life. It's they made him also feel shame about the fact that he loved this guy. And it's like, you shouldn't have to deal with that too, on top of all the rest of it. Leaving that behind is hard. The internalized stuff is most painful.
I think I felt that Flint, James McGraw, got where he was in the Navy by playing by the game, basically, playing the game by its rules, by paying attention to what people said, by keeping his reputation kind of good, by working really hard. And when his surrogate father figure, the Admiral or Sea Lord or whoever he is, says to him...
Sea Lord.
They call them Sea Lords. They do call them Sea Lords.
Oh, that's the best.
The Sea Lords. But when he calls, I want to be a Sea Lord. Can I be a Sea
me
Lord?
too.
Yeah, that's a great title.
It's a sea lady, sea dame. When he's beating up that guy in the bar, his mentor says to him, you know, there's this other side to you that you're hiding from yourself and you're hiding from everybody. And that is Flint, right? So Flint's always been there. He's just buried down deep. Because he's had to work his way out of basically poverty, working class poverty, to become somebody in this society. Whereas Thomas Hamilton is also doesn't fit in this society, but for other reasons. But Thomas Hamilton hasn't had to work his way up. It reminds me a little bit of that conversation that Calico Jack has with Woods. What's his name again?
Woods Rogers, yeah.
Can't remember his name. Calico Jack says to Woods Rogers, like, we arrived at the same place, but I had a lot of catching up to do. I didn't start out with a wealthy family and, you know, my parents gave me everything and I had a ship and a fleet. Like, I started out from very humble backgrounds and I had to work really hard and really fast to catch up to the place where you are now. And I think that's a theme running through a lot of the characters' storylines and characters' journeys, like Charles Vance, you know, like starting out almost pretty much as a slave from her childhood.
Yeah.
Like, basically, a lot of these characters are trying to build better lives for themselves. But Flint is really the one that feels shame about it.
Well, the other thing the show is about is narratives, the power of story, building a story about yourself, and who has the power to write history and write people's stories. And all of these pirates are trying to create a story for themselves that will live on. And Flint talks a lot about how the British Empire intentionally writes the story of them as monsters and things to be afraid of in the dark, and they're not that.
So speaking of characters who help other characters realize pirates might not be monsters, the other bit of headcanon that we want to mention is around the character of Billy Bones.
This is an interesting headcanon.
Yeah, so throughout the show, again, we have these interesting relationships, but by and large, when the pirates come back to Nassau, many of the minor characters, their first thing is like, we gotta get to the brothel.
Oh, yeah.
We can't stay offshore. I gotta go see my favorite prostitute. And then you have the character of Billy Bones, who seems to never be in that space, doesn't seem to have any romantic relationships with anyone. And that could mean a whole variety of things, of course. It could just be that the writers chose not to focus on that. But a headcanon that has emerged from the fandom is that Billy Bones might be asexual. And you know what? There's not a lot of asexuals on TV, so like, sure.
Sure. Abso-fucking-lutely. I think this is a totally valid headcanon. I think to me what it says though is the state of things is pretty bad. Everyone is so sexualized that if one character just happens to not have any sexual relationships on screen, then we have to be like, maybe he's asexual because we need representation. Everyone else is having sex constantly.
Yeah, but I did transition to this referencing what might be my favorite scene in the show, which I do want to talk about a little bit, which is at one point, a group of pirates have captured the daughter of the governor of North Carolina. And Captain Flynn is bringing her back because he has a relationship with Thomas. Miranda, there's like a whole lot of plot. And she's on the boat being like, oh, these pirates are all monsters. They're not even human. She sees an unattractive pirate who's covered in scars, and she's like, I'm terrified of them. And then they're having dinner one night, and Billy Bones shows up to say something. And I don't know the actor's name. You guys might.
Billy Bones?
Yeah.
Tom Hopper or something like that?
Yeah.
He's like very conventionally attractive. He's super tall and
square-jawed,
super ripped, square-jawed, blonde, blue-eyed. And she sees him and is immediately like, maybe pirates could be okay. And he just looks at her, why is this woman looking at me? I'm doing my work. And he gets out of there.
He's always doing his work.
And she finds out his backstory, right? And his backstory is that he had a life. He had parents, you know, like, and I'm like all the pirates did.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Every person here had a life before they were a pirate.
He's handsome.
I just feel like I just feel it's really problematic to think somebody is like morally decent because they're good looking. I mean, there's plenty of very good looking, morally corrupt people out there.
That's the thing then too, is then in the next scene she sees that, you know, quote unquote ugly pirate again, and she's like, maybe that guy also has a family and a life and an inner, you know, feeling.
Well, it's amazing what it takes for people to learn that about other humans. You know, it's depressing and horrible, but like if she can transfer that to looking at unattractive people and being like, maybe they are also people, like, good for you. You're learning and growing in the world.
This actually leads to one of my favorite scenes. It's the trial, or actually it's not the trial, it's the hanging, isn't it? Of Charles Vane and Flint. And they're sitting there on these chairs in front of a whole audience, basically a huge crowd of people. And the diary of the governor's daughter is being read out. And it's just the most like condescending, naive, stupid sentiments in the diary, you know, like pirates are people too. And, you know, just like this sort of, you know, I've discovered that they have feelings and they had lives and they may have to do things that they don't want to do for reasons that they, you know, that are complicated. And they're not just evil demons yet. And Flint and Charles are just sitting there like, why are we listening to this? and like, just like, what? Like these two adult men listening to this diary of a teenage girl being read out right before they get hanged. And then I think they start talking to each other, don't they? They just start ignoring me.
Yeah, because they're like biding their time, waiting for whatever their plan is going to come into action.
Like,
and so they're
like,
like,
what is this bullshit? It's just so funny.
No, that girl's whole turn is hilarious. And like, oh my God.
It's a huge realization for a teenage girl in the 1700s. You know, she's been told all her life that pirates are evil.
Thank goodness Billy Bones is just so handsome.
The power of Billy Bones' attractiveness. Changing minds, winning hearts and minds, like, you know?
Sharp jawline.
Yeah.
That's great. I do love like Vane and Flint bonding in that scene, though. They're a fun duo that you don't see.
I wish there was more of them together, actually. Like, but you know, sadly, Charles Vane meets his fate.
There's only so much Vane to go around, you know.
Yeah,
True.
But yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so that is a lot of the pairings and duos and trios of the group, and then our interesting Billy Bones asexual headcanon. So I think, unless we have more to say about the specific pairings on the show, we can move on to some quotes. We love a quote.
Yeah, we have a good number of quotes for this episode too. A lot of talk. between the actors about the choices that they made in the show. So how are we going to work through these?
So we have a set of quotes because this is all sort of revolving around when it becomes public knowledge that Flint has this gay backstory that was played as a reveal over the course of season 2. So once this is out there in the public, they got quotes from basically all the actors on the show like, how do you feel about this? So we have a whole set of those. And then we have some quotes specifically from the actor who plays Flint about his experience of it, because he knew all along. So it wasn't a reveal for him, but how he experienced it throughout. And then some hilarious fun quotes from Rupert Penry Jones, who played Thomas Hamilton. So that's sort of the order that these will play out. And then we'll get to a little bit from the creator.
Mm-hmm. To kick off, we'll start with a quote from Sean Cameron Michael, who played Richard Guthrie. When he found out, he said, "I had no idea they were going to go that direction. And when I got the script for it, and it said Flint turns to Thomas and they kiss, I was like, what? Seriously? Fuck. Whoa. Okay." And I was like, reread it. Where are my glasses? Let me reread this. Seriously? I was really, really shocked. And I was like, fuck. How brave. How brave are the writers? How brave is Starz to go there with that? I think it's beautiful that Black Sails can go there, that the story can go there. I think what then happens is with all the flashbacks in season 2, which are beautiful and amazing, it's almost like one wants to quickly then rewind the tape, quickly go back to season 1 and go, were there any clues there? But I think it's great. And I think it's really, really brave that Starz is going there with it.
Oh, this is like my ideal quote on this podcast. I'm obsessed with when people go on and on about how brave it is to make characters gay. Imagine the persecution they could be facing.
And also the whole, like, were there any clues? Like, you know, like a gay person has to somehow have like a button or a flag sticking out of their body, or like some clue that I am not, you know, I am not heterosexual.
He was waving that gay pride flag.
Yeah, I didn't notice that, you know, he had the particular ear pierced and he was wearing a handkerchief in this back pocket. And you're like, good God,
like
man.
that sexuality is always like signposted, you know? I mean, people don't always signpost or go around talking about what their sexuality is. It's your assumptions about them that is what means that you think something about them, right? So I guess this guy assumed he was straight, I suppose.
I would say the biggest clues were his relationship with Miranda through all of season 1.
Yes, I think, as you know, we'll get into, or as we've talked about, there is some evidence through the weirdness of his character in season 1, like something's happening. Something's going on. But I also, now that we mention it, love the idea of someone doing like an edit where like this quote is overlaid and then they've cut in like a gay pride flag or like a handkerchief or like a piercing, and they're like,
how did you not notice there were
he's
so
wearing
many
a t-shirt
clues?
that says I'm gay.
I love that. So anyway, I mean, no hate to Cameron Michael. He's loving it. He's having a great time. Like, but not, like, it's still hilarious.
It's your classic. It's so brave. But he's on board clearly, and he's like, awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. It was so cool, so brave. So yeah, fantastic. And now we have one from Zach McGowan, who plays Charles Vane. And he said, I think the fans are going to love it because I think it further justifies Flint's character. I mean, there's going to be people who are pissed, like, fuck that. You can't do that to pirates. You know what I mean? I'm really excited for that conversation to happen because it's probably a rare thing. To go back and show his history and a homosexual relationship that is basically what has made him become a pirate is, I think, awesome. I remember when we read episode 5 last year, we were all texting like, oh my God. Then we were on set like, did you read that? Holy shit. He was basically persecuted by the people who were supposed to be his community and the government. So I think it's going to be essentially the foundation for the rest of the show. And I think that, you know what? The people who don't like it will have to ask their questions about why they don't like things to themselves.
Too true.
Keep away, homophobes.
Sadly,
don't bring us your questions.
Did ask themselves those questions, but we can ask the questions for them.
I mean, we'll get to it, but there are probably some people who needed to ask themselves those questions.
Yeah, but I like this because, sure, there's the like, yay, we're on a show where there's gay representation. I feel happy about that. But I like that his quote's mostly about how important it is to the story and how, like, narratively, it's a great turn. And that's the whole point, is like, this is going to be the main thing of the show now. I love this as a narrative twist. And you're like, yeah, totally. Great. It's a more important conversation than like, we're so brave.
No, and again, getting at what we were just saying, right? Like, this fills in his backstory and explains the weirdness of season 1.
Yeah, exactly. It's quality storytelling. You're watching season 1 and you're like, why does this man behave this way? And then you watch season 2 and you're like, it all makes sense.
Yeah, all coming together.
It's all coming together.
Next, we have some
Our
great
fave.
quotes.
Yeah.
From Toby Schmitz, who played Calico Jack. He says, God, it's good. You know what I loved about it? The kiss is nothing in what the big reveal is. It just sets off a sequence. It was this huge sequence. In the middle of it, there's a kiss. Before I saw it, I rather momentarily thought, oh, that'll be the big wow moment. But it's all the stuff that comes after it. Because right up to the kiss, I think you're going, oh my God, this is a 3-way salon idea. And then the emotional fallout of how much he loved him and how much he felt ashamed is the real power of the next 6 or 7 minutes after the kiss. That's the knockout television, I thought. It's the sequence after the kiss. I thought, well, I haven't seen that on telly, and definitely not on a pirate genre mash show. I thought it was great, and they've been setting it up from the beginning, that this is a sexually fluid world. There's different rules here. I keep thinking about Berlin 1922 or San Francisco 1967, when the gloves are off about partner swapping, about going with your actual gut and finding out who you are sexually, and then the emotional fallout of that.
Toby Schmitz, I'm in love with you. This quote is the best quote. Berlin, 1922. San Francisco, 1967.
He's a fancy man.
He's a fancy man. Also, 3-way salon. That's really good.
He's kind of right, I think, that the show sort of explores like the emotional weight of relationships, regardless of whether they are straight. The characters are more sexually fluid. I think that it enjoys the parallels of the different relationships. So, you know, like the triangle here, another triangle there. But it's not like saying this is a gay relationship and we should be so brave about it. Or like, it's not making a point. I mean, I guess it makes a point that like Thomas and Flint's relationship isn't accepted in society. But once you enter the pirate world, I don't think really anybody cares. Do you know what I mean? It's more about how these people are relating to each other. And sometimes it's sexual, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's a close friendship, sometimes it's romantic. And so he's right. It's like, it's different rules, you know? And it's kind of almost like there aren't as many rules. People are able to navigate this emotional experience themselves, the sexual and emotional experience themselves.
Well, it also is sort of just generally in this world of the show, removing the sexual component as like the most important aspect of a relationship, because they all have these really intimate, important personal relationships with each other. And like even the ones that aren't sexual, or at least aren't explicitly sexual in the show, are just as narratively compelling because these people are all so intertwined with each other in these interesting ways, which is why I think we talked about the sort of all of the trios of the show, and the way that the relationships play out is not usually just like what these two people mean to each other, but like how does the three of them all interact, and how does that affect them, which I think is interesting. But yeah, he also touches on an idea we talked about, which is how much shame plays a factor in Flint's story, which I think is really important and interesting for him. So he's right that like the kiss itself doesn't play as this huge, crazy moment in the episode. The reason that episode is impactful is because not that you're seeing the two guys kiss, but that's the aha moment of like a season and a half of figuring out Flint's persona. So all of the ways that play out are like, oh my God, it's all coming together. Everything about him makes sense now, which is quality storytelling. Schmitz gets it.
Yeah. And, you know, it's, I think what we've talked about as well, right? Like, why would you leave society to go be a pirate? It's because the rules that are set up in society don't allow you to be yourself or find yourself. And I think that's true with Flynn, and it's true with Anne and a lot of the characters in the show.
So the final of the other actor quotes we have is from Clara Paget, who played Anne Bonny. And she says, I loved it because obviously going along with my storyline as well, it's just exploring these relationships in this time where gay and lesbian, it wasn't defined. It still isn't. For some reason, we'd like to define it and put it in boxes nowadays. So I loved that storyline and making a male do it for once. We've seen the girl on girl stuff and it was time to show that. And they're at sea. It's like being in the army or in the Navy. Of course you're going to create these bonds. It's a generally male society, so it makes total sense. I think it's great, and it's brave that they touched on that because they're these macho guys. To show that sign on television with pirates is brave. I was very proud of them for putting that in.
So brave.
So brave.
No, but it's important because, yes, the show was quick to show lesbians, explicit lesbians.
Because there's not any sort of societal price to be paid for showing lesbians, right?
Yeah.
Nobody ever says that that's brave.
Is this what this is going to be? Is this exploitative? And then the show evolves in a way where we're like, okay, no, they're really just exploring a lot of different things. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do. I really appreciate her saying, making the male do it for once.
I think also
honestly,
there is a point to be made about relationships like this developing in a generally male society or an almost all male society. I think it says something about us as a society that like we're shocked or surprised when men develop romantic relationships with each other in a society where there are basically just men, because I think it says something that we don't see men as necessarily as romantic unless there's a woman there. Do you know what I mean? And like, and it's interesting that I think people who were watching this show had like possibly had less knowledge about the fact that in this period of the golden age of pirates, there was actual common practices of men forming economic and like romantic unions with each other. I mean, there's even a word for it, matelotage.
Matelotage? I never know how to pronounce it.
It's French, yeah. So that sort of makes sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's French.
Like French. Which is like a same-sex civil union between pirates and sailors in the 17th and 18th centuries, where they could share each other's economic goods and they could share each other's wealth, and also that they would inherit from one another if one of them died. But also historians think there was probably oftentimes a romantic aspect to this too. It wasn't just a sort of economic thing.
I think we should be seeing more gay pirates. Gay pirates have been woefully underrepresented in media up until this point. Now we have 2 shows with gay pirates, and it's not enough.
No. Give me more.
Okay. So should we talk about Toby Stephens?
Yes. So that brings us to the 2 actors in our main couple of Flint and Thomas Hamilton. We have a few quotes from Toby Stephens. The first is, "You're setting up this character in a certain way. And what I found particularly amusing was before the revelation, I had this huge following from guys. But as soon as that happened, it was like they had been betrayed. It was the sense of utter betrayal. And I wasn't surprised because I knew it was going to be a massive thing. And you're kind of pulling the rug out from under them in a certain way. For a lot of guys, they just can't get their head around it. What was really interesting was you had this massive outcry from all those kind of guys. Then you also had a massive outcry from the people going, that's fantastic."
And then in a similar vein, he also is talking about the people that he heard from that had issues with it. And he says, then most of the guys that had cried out against it, by the end of it, they'd come around again. And you go, that's kind of cool. And it's exactly the point of why you're doing this. Because of his sexuality, it doesn't define who this person is. I love that he had experiences with people who changed their minds, because those are not the people that you hear from for the most part. You hear from people who are either on board immediately who saw that turn and were like, this show's not what I thought it was.
So, I mean, I know we're going to go and talk about this a bit more later because we'll talk about what academics and researchers have said about this show. But he's talking about a particular phenomenon as well, I think, which is, we'll go on to talk about it, so I won't say too much, but they call it hetero-baiting, which I don't think is a real term. I think it's just been created by angry people. That's the natural assumption, basically. It's based on natural assumption that somebody is heterosexual and that heterosexuality is the norm. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what he's sort of talking about here, which is that people felt betrayed.
Yeah, but not just the heteronormativity assumption of it, but the idea that like the creators of the show specifically played on your heteronormative assumptions and then flipped them around
it was a trick
mess with you.
Whereas I don't think there was any indication in season 1 that we knew anything sure or certain about James Flint's sexuality.
He was a man of mystery.
I mean, all we saw is him have sex with a woman and seemingly not enjoy it. Again, you watch season 1, you're like, something's going on.
Something's happening
here.
Yeah.
Don't know what it is yet.
Certainly, I would say didn't have enough evidence to conclusively make any decisions about his sexuality after season 1.
Yes, I agree with that.
But yeah, it's a fun, different scenario for him because he knew from when they cast him on the show. So he always knew it was leading up to this time when people would like freak out about it. And I'm sure all of his interactions with people during season 1 that were like, you know, bros who were coming to him to be like, Flint's so cool, man. I fucking love how cool Flint is. Like he had to be thinking, oh, I can't wait.
He's going to become cooler.
Oh, yeah.
Wait till season 2.
So that's good stuff. He was having a good time. But, you know, who wasn't having as good of a time? Rupert Penry Jones.
Yeah. Thomas Hamilton.
This is a good set of quotes. Okay, so he says about his arc in the show, I knew that it would be a big deal. Can you imagine the lead character in a show about pirates with a famous character like Flint, and you're going to basically say that he's gay? That's kind of massive. I mean, the cast didn't even know about it until they actually got that episode. It was very hush-hush, but I thought it was a great idea. So far, you're thinking, so good, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he's bringing in the idea of a conspiracy of sorts.
Uh-oh.
He suggested that his role on the show was scaled back after some people were, quote, freaked out by the storyline.
He says, I don't know what happened, but I think maybe there were some people at the top who were uncomfortable about that side of things. So maybe it didn't get put into the show as much as maybe it was originally going to be. I was certainly led to believe Hamilton was a more major character than he ended up being. So I think what happened was they started seeing the storyline, what a major effect it was having, and it freaked a few people out like, no, we can have lesbian pirates, but not gay ones. The people at the top.
The people at the top. I love this idea because the creators of the show, when they conceived of the show, always knew that this was the plan. Presumably when they pitched the show to stars, they said that was part of the plan. They delivered on that plan. It cannot be said that Flint and Hamilton are not explicitly in a relationship on the show. They kiss. There's like, you know, them in bed together.
Oh, yeah.
Confessions of love.
A lot of
Confessions of love.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, he's getting a little bit at I think what we hinted at a bit earlier in the show, of the idea of like, maybe they didn't show as much explicit sexual material with the two of them as they have with some lesbian characters on the show. But to me, in my mind, that's a storytelling choice. I think we talked about maybe they were trying to focus more on the sort of romantic elements of their relationship than the sexual ones in an intentional way. But to me, this smacks of someone who is just upset about his screen time. Like, not so much the storytelling, because to me the storytelling is effectively doing what I presume they were trying to do. But he believes in his heart of hearts that he was told he would be, I'm going to be number 2 on the call sheet or something. I'm going to be a hugely important character. And they've basically written me out.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know if he expected to be in more flashbacks, because
maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else you would add to the story.
I mean, you could give him a sex scene, but then that would just be one more scene. Like, it's not like they couldn't extend the story anymore,
right?
Because he was hauled off to Bedlam, wasn't he? And James had to flee,
and then supposedly killed.
Like,
yeah.
Like, I feel like that's had to happen, you know? I mean, right.
That's the entire motivating factor for the main character of the show. And I don't think that you can argue that his character is not major in terms of the repercussions on the show. He's hugely influential character. The show doesn't happen without Thomas Hamilton.
You know, okay, well, could you show more scenes of them in love? Maybe, but it would just be making the same point that you've already made. I mean, certain point in the show, Thomas Hamilton kind of talks about Adam and Eve, sort of as if he's comparing him and James to Adam and Eve. And then, you know, he writes in the beginning of that book, like we said before, you know, to my deepest love, or my truest love.
Truest love.
Mm-hmm.
No shame.
I just feel like, what if you showed them, I don't know, having a picnic together and canoodling in the park or something, then I just feel like you're just showing them what we've already showed them. And I'm pretty sure that writers, creators, producers, people who are making the show, right? Scenes are money, scenes are time, you know? So you don't necessarily need to show something that you don't need to show. Every scene should
Right.
useful in some way, right? So
Yeah.
And it's a huge ensemble cast, too. We're tracking a lot of different characters and a lot of different storylines, and it's not super relevant to like the present ongoing plot, too. So you have to kind of manage all of that as you're fitting it together.
Yeah. Well, and this is his exact complaint, but from the perspective of the showrunners, like, if we've effectively told the story in the scenes that we have, I don't need to be paying Rupert Penry Jones to come in for 3 more episodes. I just don't need to.
Yeah.
Like, the story is told. I don't know why. I get that he's, feels slighted in some way, but it's very funny to me that his angle is like, someone at the top has silenced me.
I mean, I think that does happen in shows.
Sure.
Yeah.
But not usually in shows that have canonical queer representation on them like this. So that's very funny. I don't know if this is, because we're rushing up against it, a good point to talk about stars and their representation more generally.
Mm-hmm.
Stars, I mean, well, because this would make sense. What he's saying would make sense if stars had a history of not showing queer characters on screen or cutting down on queer storylines or shutting stuff down like that. But before Black Sails was even on air, I think it was either right before it or around the same time, there was Spartacus, which has queer representation both in the first few seasons, but also in the later season of Spartacus, which is where the action really heats up. Like, there's an actual rebellion against the Romans, which is amazing. There is a gay couple who are shown explicitly having sex with each other, an explicit, clear love story. Very romantic love story. And I mean, I don't know if I should spoil it for anybody, but they are the only people to properly survive. It's like at the end of the show, like,
love it.
So nice.
Opposite of burying your gays, bury everyone other than your gays.
The gay couple go off, and I mean, I'm not really spoiling it because it's actual history. I mean, Spartacus' rebellion failed.
Sure.
So I don't think Rupert Penry Jones' argument really makes sense in this context, because other Star shows were doing it. So if it was going to be the network or the producers, then they would have shut that down. And then obviously like P-Valley. I mean, I know P-Valley is many, many years later.
Yeah, but this continues a tradition of gay representation on
Stars. Is arguably the most queer-friendly. Because Spartacus started in 2010, and this show started in 2014, so it's before.
And I mean, I think about Outlander. Outlander's a bit of a different situation, but there is a canonical gay character in Outlander. I mean, he's not shown as being particularly lucky in love, but he exists in the show, and the people who care about him and are close to him accept his sexuality, and they accept him, and do you know what I mean? It's like he's not condemned. He's not condemned for being gay. He finds it hard in the society that he lives in, but that's not shown as being like a character flaw or a problem or. So, and obviously P-Valley. I mean, P-Valley is probably the most accurate, clear, diverse representation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to me, P-Valley is sort of, you'd think we've gotten further than we have in terms of representation in 2023, but not really. And P-Valley is like some of the best, like they're showing parts of the gay experience that you're not seeing anywhere
and also
else on television.
The gay experience in other ethnic communities, so like the gay experience from like an African American point of view, which, I mean, is something you don't see. Yeah.
You're not seeing a lot of that.
No. So it doesn't seem like the people at the top, at least, again, on the network side, right, are going to be like, Spartacus, yes. Outlander, sure. P-Valley, absolutely. But not these pirates. Not you, Rupert Henry.
Except, yes, these pirates, but not enough of them for Rupert Penry Jones.
Yes.
But specifically Rupert Penry Jones's gay pirate, that is offensive to me.
Yeah, and if it's like macho, it's about like, macho men. We don't want to make macho men seem effeminate or gay or whatever, that they're worried about. Then surely that would apply to Spartacus because, I mean, what's more macho than a bunch of gladiators, And surely that show would also appeal to a bunch of men who are interested in seeing fight scenes. I mean, Spartacus, the whole series is very violent. There's a lot of gore.
It's interesting because this specifically is water that Starz has treaded in before, a show that feels to many as if it is specifically targeted at like a straight male demographic, and then you got your gays in there because they're there, people. We got to show them they're there. So yeah, funny.
So we're not sure about that, Rupert Penry.
We love your performance.
We're just not sure.
We're not sure about these comments.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of those at the top, freaked out. We have a little bit of a quote from John Steinberg, who's co-creator of Black Sails, talking about sort of like why they went in this direction. How did you guys decide to tell the show this way? So he says, there's some freedom in the moment you realize that the historic record is severely compromised in terms of what these people's lives were like. They had a motive to lie, and so did the people in London. It gives us the room to try to tell a story that will hopefully feel real. It probably won't necessarily match up to the textbook, to what happened, but I think we would probably argue that the textbook is already a narrative that somebody with an agenda put together a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Preach.
Yeah, I love
John.
that. I love that.
This is obviously in response to some people being like, there's no evidence.
Yeah, there weren't gay people then.
Yeah.
There definitely were. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
But I didn't read about them in the histories.
Well, we all know that the history that we learnt in school was, constructed in a particular way by people who had particular ideas and agendas. And all history is, the whole point of history is it's supposed to be rewritten every time someone studies something, they find something new and they rewrite the history. That's what historians are supposed to do. So you're not supposed to learn one history and just stick with that and keep to that.
And right, the point is that there's not a ton of primary documentation.
And also that can be for a number of reasons as well. Like when you're studying a community that aren't necessarily widely educated.
They might not all be writing about their experiences on paper. Yeah.
There's both like a literacy component and also these people have escaped society. I don't know that they're writing for posterity to society about this is what I'm doing in my day to day. I can't wait till this gets back to,
So we have the issue of there not being a lot of primary source material, the incentive of people at the time to not necessarily represent their experiences accurately because there's stuff they were doing that, could have gotten them jailed or killed. And then we also have from looking back version of historians applying their own either heteronormativity and just biases or specific efforts to not tell these sort of stories. And it all leads to us getting that meme of seeing two people in love and then historians will say that they were roommates. I love that. Yeah.
Oh my God,
historians will say that they were close friends.
People also, when we were watching the show, people also took issue, like I saw on Reddit, what a wild west Reddit is. People took issue with the storylines connected to the community of escaped enslaved people. But people had problems with that. And it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, enslaved individuals didn't have the ability to, or didn't have the opportunities or resources all the time even to write narratives for themselves. So if you're going to just only take written material or written sources as an example of history, you're cutting out great swathes of the human population.
Not like it's a population that was specifically not educated.
Yeah.
Intentionally. Well, and if you had managed to escape from your captivity, I don't think that advertising it was high on the list.
You weren't writing missives.
Oh, boy. But anyway, I just applaud the idea of let's take back our history, right? The sort of queering of history is something we need to be doing more of.
Well, and I think to Clara's point, right? This is a thing that we know that media reinforces, right? So it's this story of we put people of color in cowboy stories and white people freak out and they're like, this is woke nonsense. And you're like, no, we've just been telling stories incorrectly through mass media for 100 years.
Yeah.
What you've absorbed is not correct.
And it just self-perpetuates because the more you see things a certain way, the more they go to make some sort of historical thing set in London and it's all white people and people are like, can we put in some not white people? And they're like, but there weren't non-white people in London then? And you're like, there were. I promise you there were.
Right, exactly. It's who's in power to tell these stories. But we promise you, as long as Europeans have been going around collecting people of color, there have been people of color in places.
And they've been doing that a long time.
True.
All right, excellent. So a wonderful set of quotes. Shall we move along to the literature?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so this is our usual AO3 check-in. Let's talk about some metrics, how many stories there are. I believe there has been a little baby boom of interest in this ship following extreme interest in our flagmate's death. So I think these numbers have gone up a little bit in recent times. What we found was about 5,500 total Black Sails fic, and then within that, 2,100 of them are tagged Flint Silver, and about 1,400 are Flint Thomas. So an interesting, like, almost parity between the ships there in terms of what's the most popular.
But it's a solid number of fics.
Yes, because both of them are pretty notable ships within the community, we ended up reading a fic for both of them, a Flint Silver fic and a Thomas Flint fic. So we can talk about both of them. The first that we read was the top Flint Thomas fic called Nature's Delight by Fire. Do you want to talk about it, or shall I?
I can. So Nature's Delight, basically, they capture a ship. Mm-hmm. And they find that there is a prisoner on board. And I think what Billy Bones says, hey, Captain, we found a prisoner. And oh my God, it's Thomas.
Who saw that coming?
And Flint is like, get out of here, Billy, down. Billy's like, what's going on? And so, Thomas is not in the best of health, unsurprisingly. No. And Flint ends up taking him back to the house that he shared with Miranda. This is taking place after Miranda has died. And Flint is unsurprisingly very protective of Thomas. He's wary of anyone coming around to check in on them. He wants to take care of him all by himself. But at the same time, there's a little bit of he's worried how Thomas will feel about him now that he's become a cutthroat pirate, that, he killed their friend after their friend killed Miranda.
Yeah, he wasn't much of a friend, really.
He was a bad friend. Flint killed Thomas's father. He's very concerned about it. So over the course of the story, Mr. Scott is coming in to try to help, and he's brought another woman to help take care of Thomas, but Flint is very resistant. But Thomas is eventually like, it's fine. I still love you. I've changed too. Mm-hmm. We're going to figure this out together. I'm fine with you being a pirate. And it's nice.
Yeah.
Anything I missed?
The only thing that I found, in general, hurt comfort, very sweet, nice to see them together again. The thing that I found sort of like muddled and interesting about this was the idea that they're going to try to complete the mission that they started back when he was working with Thomas, where I'm like, I don't really know. I think the mission has changed a little bit. Like, the idea initially was this very British Empire paternalistic but nice thing of like, well, we'll just pardon all the pirates and then everyone will be happy. And like, if you watch the show, when the pirate pardoning is happening, it's another effort to control the pirates. And there's a reason that Flint doesn't want people to sign on to it, right? And so it's just sort of interesting to me that it's framed as like, we can finally get back to our original mission. I was like, okay, I think circumstances have changed a little bit, but I do hope you do some sort of mission. Good for you guys.
Yeah, because I feel like the original mission in the series with the pardoning of the pirates was never going to work. I mean, not to criticize Thomas for his optimistic and hopeful beliefs. Yeah, I feel like I really love Thomas. Yeah. I feel like he's got a good heart. Yeah.
He's
trying to do
guy.
something bigger and better. But he's not realizing that actually the British Empire is the problem. Yeah. So, and I feel like the pirates themselves, they don't want to be hanged. So pardoning would prevent that, I suppose. But they don't want to also be under the thumb of the British Empire. And that's the difference.
Right, which is the actual, when Woodes Rogers comes to town offering pardons, it is not in this sort of like, we'll all just live in harmony and be friends with each other.
Yeah, keep the profits of anything that happens to yourself. No.
No. So yeah, that original pardon scheme needs a little bit of revision, I think, now that they've both had the lived experiences that they have had. But anyway, generally very sweet. Nice to see him taking care of Thomas.
Yeah.
He deserves it. So the other fic is a Flint Silver fic called Until Death. It is All Life by Kraftnarok. And this one is a little bit of a different tone. It begins after Flint has told Silver about his relationship with Hamilton. They've had this like bonding moment, and he's told him about this experience that has animated all of his experiences in life, and Silver now finally understands him. And what Silver has taken out of this is a bit of an obsession with the idea that Flint was in this gay relationship. He can't help himself from thinking about it, and he's imagining it, and he realizes he's imagining it all the time, but he doesn't know what Thomas Hamilton looks like, so he started maybe imagining himself in these sexy scenes with Flint, and he's like, oh man, I gotta do something about this. So the two of them go to Miranda's house one day to just sort of chill and have a free day, and he can't stop thinking about it. So he finally, sort of in his mind, subtly asks Flint what Thomas looks like. And Flint is like, what the fuck? Like, why are you bothering me about this? What the fuck is wrong with you? Stop asking me about Thomas. There's a picture of him in the other room if you want to go look at his portrait. And so Flint goes and he looks at Thomas's portrait and he's like, oh, okay, he's not what I expected. Now I can think about this. But he realizes in that, like, I don't know that that's going to do it for me. Like, I think imagining myself with Flint is really what has been turning me on about this situation. So this could be an issue. And he goes back out and just sort of like is subtly annoying Flint for the rest of the day by going around and touching all of his meaningful possessions within Miranda's house. And Flint is like, why? What is going on? Why are you acting like this? And finally, at the end of the day, they go back to the ship. And Flint invites him back into his quarters. And now that they're back on the ship, he is like offering him a drink and he seems in a much better mood. And he's like, I have a gift for you, Silver. And he has him come over and he gives him a copy of Don Quixote, a beloved book of his. And he is like, you know, they've been having a conversation about their relationship, and because Silver has this idea that he could end up being the downfall of Flint. If the two of them get close to each other, it could end up being bad for them both. And he's like, you know, I really think you should read this book, Don Quixote, because if what you're saying about our relationship is true, then you are the, you know, Sancho to my Don Quixote, reining in my idealistic impulses. And so Silver's like, what is going on? Like, I'm feeling a little bit of tension. Is he hitting on me with this book, basically? And he is. Flint has all along known that Silver is acting this way because he's got the hots for him. So he sort of just like gives him an opportunity to do something about it. And he does. And they have sex. And then they, at the end, are again sort of contemplating the sort of Don Quixote of it all and what this relationship is going to mean. And Silver is like, the closer we get to each other, the more risk there is, right? That this relationship could go south and be a problem for us. And Flint is basically like, you're acting like I didn't have any choice in it, but this is what I've decided. Let's just jump in and see how it goes, basically. And it's like, great. They're gonna be in love and also potentially be each other's ruin as all of this battle goes forth. And that is what happens, that Silver
Very of the show.
destroying Flint in the end. But, you know, it's out of love. And that's nice. They really love each other. I thought this was a pretty fun one. It was very of the show. I liked the characterizations of the characters. And then I can imagine them sitting around having like a Don Quixote conversation about their relationship because they're nerds.
Yeah, I thought this was quite believable, actually. You know, sometimes you read fan fiction and it seems like the scenario is quite forced. This did not feel like that at all. I thought it was quite believable. I was like, I could see this. I could see this on the show.
And that is the best compliment for a fanfic. Well done, Craft Narok. You've nailed them. Okay, so we have a couple of things in terms of our quote-unquote scholarly work, some more scholarly than others. So I don't know if you still want to talk about Diana Christina Rasman's thesis at all, Clara?
So Diana Christina Rasman wrote a thesis for Malmo University entitled Black Sails, Rainbow Flag, Examining Queer Representations in Film and Television. And she says lots and lots of stuff in this thesis. I would really recommend reading it. It's really useful, really interesting. She doesn't just talk about Flint and Thomas. She talks about Max. She talks about Anne Bonny. She talks about Eleanor. She talks about all sorts of characters. And she talks about the way it's filmed, the way the scenes are filmed. She talks about how, you know, so some of the writing and the sort of choices that the creators have made differ from representations of gay people in other television and media. So not making the relationship between James and Thomas seem sort of predatory or sort of overly sexual. She says it making them seem more romantic, which is kind of unusual for the way male homosexuality was sort of represented in media at the time. But one of the things that she talks about, which I really picked up, which I thought was really interesting, was this whole thing of hetero-baiting that we mentioned before. And she talks about this in relation to the fact of how certain people responded to when it was revealed that James Flint was gay or had a sexual relationship with a man. And also a love affair with a man, which was the reason for everything he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more important part, yeah.
And that's the national assumption that someone is heterosexual or heterosexuality is the norm. And so that you have been baited into thinking this person is straight, only for it to be revealed that they're not straight. And what she was saying was that this was this term that was created by these fans of the show who were unhappy about this plot. And it's almost like a perversion of the whole concept of queer baiting, which is a thing. So hetero-baiting is not a thing. It's just something that people have used to express their annoyance, basically their prejudice, really. And that it's like born out of the term of queer baiting, but queer baiting itself is a real thing. So I thought that was really, really super interesting. It's definitely worth a read. You can just get online for free. So
I think that's so interesting because when you're thinking about, I think on its face, for people who aren't thinking about it too hard, you might be like, well, if queer baiting's real, then why couldn't hetero baiting be real? But when you start to think about the actual details of it, it's like, what, in terms of the baiting, what work are they putting in to convince you that these characters are straight, right? None at all. They're putting in no work. That is entirely your assumptions based on society and heteronormativity and all of this. So it's impossible to me to make the argument that people are bait and switching you when they didn't have Flint say, I'm so straight, I love women and only women in season 1. Like, that is not a part of it. So where is the baiting? It's just you being hoisted by the petard of your own biases. You know, it's not like something that they did to intentionally trick you.
Right. I mean, as we've talked about throughout the course of this podcast, right, when we're identifying queer baiting, what we're saying is the writers are putting in these overt romantic tropes into things. They are creating relationships that don't make any sense outside of a romantic or sexual context. And none of Flint's relationships fit that in terms of their straightness or whatever, right? Again, getting back to the fact that all we see him do in anything romantic or sexual is not enjoy having sex with a woman.
Right.
You know, he's not going to the whorehouses. He's not engaging in any, intimate emotional relationship, again, other than with Miranda. But there's such weirdness there that the only thing it should tell you is there's something more going on here that we have not explained. And what could that explanation be? That should be the question.
I mean, it also exposes this aspect of our society, which I think is particularly unpleasant, where we assume that one particular way of being is the norm. And I think as we go forward into the future, we have to be able to evolve beyond that. Like the idea that, you just naturally assume before you have any evidence of anything that, this person is this, because that's the norm. That's normal. And anything else from that, you might find out later, is a deviation of the norm. It's the deviation aspect of it that I find very unhappy, because deviation suggests like an abnormality, and that's really problematic. It's really dangerous. So I was tricked into believing he was normal, and it turns out he's not normal. It's like, dude, like what is your concept of normal? And you weren't tricked, but also what's your concept of normal? Like he is normal. It's just your concept of normal is very, very freaking narrow and discriminatory. So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but what that idea invites is this sort of burden of proof on queer characters on television, right? Where every character is assumed to be straight. You don't need any evidence to prove that. And to prove that a character is non-straight in any way, there's like all of this evidence that needs to be compiled and stacked up until you get to a point where you're like, we've reached the tipping point now where I can accept that this character is queer. And that tipping point is almost always them not even necessarily saying it, because supernatural, but like usually acting upon their queerness in some visible way, where it's like, that is not how human sexuality works. A character could even be shown to be in exclusively opposite sex relationships for the length of a show and still be bisexual, right? Like, it just, people aren't that outwardly labeling their internal experiences in the real world, and what people expect from how media portrays sexuality is just completely removed from the reality.
There is some things change. I do think there are things changing though. So, like, I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But like, if people like the new series of Good Omens, there is a relationship that is not like, no one comes up and to the screen and looks at the viewer and says, "We're gay." It's just like, they're just acting like two people who are starting to fall in love with each other, you know? And it's not, no one mentions it. No one in the show says they're gay. No one mentions it. No one says anything.
That's very
And it's just like, they're treated as individuals, you know, as people. And it's just really refreshing to watch. I could watch it without having to, do you know what I mean? Without all the sort of busyness and the sort of like, I don't know what to say, like the sort of like extra stuff that's layered upon a queer relationship in television. It was just like, oh, this is great. This is just watching two people fall in love. That's fine, you know.
I think we've joked about that over the course of the podcast. Like, what do people want? They want people to show up on screen the first appearance and be like, I'm 100% straight.
Yeah.
It's me, so-and-so. Or like, I'm very straight, but occasionally we'll have relationships with, you know, the same sex. Like you want them to announce it off the bat? Is that how you want your television to be structured? That would make you happy? Let the story unfold, man. You're watching a tale. Just let it happen.
And also, that's terrible writing, right? Wouldn't that be just sort of like exposition to the audience? That's like, you know, when someone, you know, you can tell bad writing when somebody delivers like a real like sort of exposition heavy piece of dialogue, and you're like, these two characters know this about each other. They're just explaining this for the viewer.
Well, as you know, my brother.
Starting with the as you know is the real
like hamburgers, right? It's like, yeah. Would you have this conversation in real life? Like,
oh my gosh. Okay, so great. Everybody read Black Sails, Rainbow Flag, Examining Queer Representations in Film and Television. But we also have a bit of less scholarly work in our scholarly work, and an article. We love an article called No No Shame, Queerness in the Golden Age of TV and Piracy. And this is an interesting one because it sort of threads together the ideas of Black Sails and Our Flag Means Death. But there's some stuff at the end that I think I just found quite powerful. And I wanted to share because this is sort of the joy of seeing actual queer media on television. So they said, to take the most well-known of pirates and to reframe them as traumatized queer outcasts is not intended as a historical rewrite, but as a rebuttal of the very idea of a history written by the conquerors. The British Empire, present in both stories, is depicted as an entity that is, at its worst, all-consuming barbarism, and at its best, all-consuming barbarism propped up by a veneer of civility. It is an entity that not only destroys, but warps reality around itself, reshaping history in its likeness. Either they meet the same ends as their historical counterparts, or we see the bittersweet truth of stories that are written out of history, their actions twisted into something evil. By giving that other perspective, by suggesting another account, these shows are a rallying cry for queer folk looking for their place in a world that doesn't want them to exist at all, and a reminder to everyone who stands against us which side of history they're on. So just more to the point of, and it's sort of an intentional telling of history that doesn't pretend at an unbiased version the way that history has tended to do. No actual telling of history is unbiased because historians are not without biases.
Very nicely put.
Yeah. All right. We have to talk a little bit about how fans and creators interact. I think
we've hinted at it throughout our discussion.
We've mentioned the idea of hetero-baiting, which is totally silly. But we just, obviously there are fans that did not have adversarial relationships with the creators of the show who were just sort of on board with this storytelling, but we don't need to talk about them because they're just having a lovely fun time. What we need to talk about are the Redditors.
Yes, like Clara mentioned before, folks on Reddit are having a tough time, I suppose.
What are they not?
It's hard out there for a Redditor. I just want to share this headline of a person's opinion in the r/Black Sails Reddit. Gay agenda. the only flaw in this amazing series.
I've seen this a lot in just even in the last week, not about Black Sails, but relating to the new Barbie movie. I've seen a lot of stuff about agenda this, agenda that. And it just strikes me that like when someone doesn't like something, it's like taking it personally. Like it's like there's an agenda and the agenda is against me. And sometimes I'm like, maybe this just wasn't written for you, because I don't mean to break it to you, but you're not the center of the universe. And there's like 7 other billion people on this planet. So like...
Well, I think it's exactly what we were getting at, right? It's the way history has been told is neutral. And now everyone has an agenda. And it's like, no, it was never neutral. The agenda just appealed to you at the time and supported you. And it wasn't accurate. And so like now you have to deal with that. And I understand you're having a hard time cognitively wrapping your mind around that. It's been biased the whole time. The other thing that's great about this gay agenda, the only flaw in this amazing series, right, is this person posts this after the Flint reveal. Yeah. And not after the first episode where we saw lesbians having sex. Yeah. So.
Yeah, like, I mean.
Interesting.
Where's the gay agenda in that? Like.
Well, and what's really funny about the way this plays out is they try to present this idea that it's not my personal biases. I'm just presenting statistics is basically how this guy's playing out, right? Well, he starts with, I don't mind a character being gay, but please try to keep it somewhat realistic. Here in the US, less than 4% of the population is LGBT. I would quibble with that statistic, but...
I mean, we don't have reliable numbers about it. There's no polling. It's not in the census.
No. In Black Sails, by my count, 4 out of 9 main characters are gay/bi. Flint, Max, Eleanor, Anne, not counting supporting characters. And so he sort of lays out his experience of it where, to speak to exactly what you said, when he started it, Max and Eleanor are fictional characters made for the show, so I didn't mind at all when they were introduced in bed together. Amazing. He didn't mind seeing the lesbians in bed together. Then in season 2, they started hinting that Anne Bonny is gay too. The only reason that bothered me at all is because Anne Bonny is historically known to be straight. Sure, bud.
No, she's not.
No, she's not. So it was just Hollywood turning another character gay for no reason. And then he's like, okay, but they're exploring that, but I still didn't care too much. You'll notice, again, another lesbian, and he doesn't care too much. But then, at the same time as Anne Bonny's coming out, Flint is getting this mysterious backstory, which finally ends in a big twist. Yep, you guessed it, Flint is gay too. At this point, and only at this point, I was kind of turned off by the show, since literally the entire season seemed to just be about homosexuality. When Vane surprise attacked Flint right after the big gay reveal, I half expected them to end up rolling around on the ground kissing. Everything else about the series is spectacular: dialogue, acting, costumes, music. But I thought this was supposed to be a prequel to Treasure Island, not a Brokeback Mountain retelling. It was almost fitting that the finale ended in Flint just getting shuttled off to be with his lover at the end, because the series seemed to care more about telling a gay romance story than it did anything else. And to me, it felt forced. What's really good to me about this is, like, part of what makes the show good is the storytelling, and the heart of the storytelling is this story. Like, the reason the entire arc of the show makes any sense at all is this story. So for him to narrow in on this and be like, everything else about it is so good, but this one critical point of the entire narrative is a real problem.
The show isn't just a gay love story. There's lots of other stories in it. But also, even if it was just a gay love story, who cares? What's wrong with that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you have a problem with that, then maybe you need to look at yourself and wonder why you have a problem with that. You need to check your prejudice.
It's a good old
check your prejudice.
What's the actor who plays Charles Vane? Maybe you need to ask yourself some questions.
Yeah, ask yourself some questions. Ask yourself some... What I want him to ask himself some questions about is why he saw lesbians and he was fine. He saw another lesbian and he was fine. He saw a gay man and he said, that's a bit much.
Bridge too far. Can't buy it. To your point, right, he states a statistic, which, what is that based in? Where does that number come from? Also, still, but also in 2013 or whatever, we're in a society where people are not necessarily comfortable reporting to a pollster that their sexual orientation for a variety of reasons. And then on top of that, as you were saying, right, this is a self-selecting community of people who have left normal society because for some reason that's not working for them. And you're like, this 4% is probably accurate across the whole human
Also, no one in the show
totally makes sense.
defines their sexuality. No one says I'm gay.
so
Sam Bowie
that-
doesn't say I'm bisexual. Max and Eleanor never ever say that they're in a lesbian love affair. They never mention the word lesbian. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to compare definitions that are made up about today's sexuality, which if people were filling out on a form, a lot of people would like, I'm not sure I fit in any of these boxes. I might fit in several of these boxes. I don't understand if I can always define this in clear, like verbal or clear worded terms, right? With a whole period of history where people weren't necessarily defining themselves.
Well, because this is the thing, like people identifying with this like definition of a type of person is a new phenomenon. Like if you talk about I'm gay or I'm bi or whatever, like that's not a thing people were doing, certainly not in the time of pirates and not for a long time throughout history. So if you're conceiving even now of the idea of like this many people are LGBT because they said they were whatever, they self-identified as blah, blah, blah. That's not really accounting for it. There's a difference between what people say they are and what people do. When you look at stuff like the Kinsey study, right, from the 50s or whenever that was happening, he wasn't asking people, what do you identify as? Because that's meaningless. Like that was not a useful way to characterize his activity. He's asking people what they've done. And like, way more of the people were engaging in at least some sort of same-sex contact than would have identified as being not straight. It's just a fact of life that like more people are doing gay things than are saying they are gay.
Well, it's like in the episode when we were looking at was it in our Let the Girls Kiss episode?
Maybe.
We were looking at the characterization of fandom and we see that it's like quote unquote become queerer. But when they were doing the polling in the 90s, a lot of the terms we use today did not exist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women were just identifying as women because they weren't conceiving of being non-binary.
Sure.
In the early 90s. Was that the poll that we saw where people were filling out in the early 90s where people were putting things in like lady, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. I love that. That's my identity.
Yeah, me too. Lady, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, it's very hard to nail this sort of stuff down because it is invisible and conceptions of it change all the time. It's not easy to quantify. If you're asking people what they self-identify as, you're not getting the true answers to what they're doing or even thinking, right? Like people
all
don't
categories are artificial.
Exactly. And they change constantly. Like people are
part of this I think as well, like you can see from this guy's particular comment and when he actually sort of talks about how he became really unhappy with the show. I would just ask him, like, is it actually about homosexuality that you're upset about? Like, is it a same-sex loving relationship that you're upset about? Or is it actually gay sex? Is it male gay sex? And I suspect it's... And that speaks to me, like, of the over-sexualization of queer couples, you know? And I think one of the things that's very, like, clear in Black Sails is, well, one, they're not defining themselves by terms, and two, that the sex there's a lot of like emotion behind the sex. It's not casual sexual relationships with each other. I mean, I guess you could argue occasionally Charles Vane and maybe Eleanor are kind of just, I don't know, releasing some tension, but there is a lot
of emotion there.
Well, with the two of them, yeah. Yeah, some people are engaging in casual sexual activity, but not a lot of the main characters.
Yeah, and you don't actually see that much explicit sex in the whorehouse. Like, it's not like there's women walking around topless and stuff, right? But you're not spending hours of the TV series watching random characters have sex with each other in the whorehouse.
That would be so awful. What kind of TV show would that be?
The sex that's happening between the main characters, whether it's same-sex sex or whether it's heterosexual sex or whatever, there's all emotion behind it.
No one is having an emotionless experience with any of the other main characters.
No. It's all emotion all the time with these people.
Like, is it that you're against love? You know, this guy? Or is it just that you're really uncomfortable with the idea of gay sex?
I think all signs point to that when he describes his experience where he's like, women fucking? Okay. Women exploring their sexuality? Okay. Man? Nope. Well, and what's interesting is, we've talked about it, but there's nothing explicit going on in his relationship with Thomas. They kiss, which I think is a bridge too far for this guy, but like they definitely are not over-sexualizing Thomas and Flint in terms of the sorts of sex we have seen on the show. To be honest,
the most uncomfortable sex scene for me was the one between Miranda and James in the first season.
Yeah, but that's because it's supposed to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, because it's weird.
Okay. So we don't have to get as much into this one, but I just, again, want to share the headline of it because this is another person encapsulating their experience of watching this show and how things change for them. They ask, can you still look at Flint the same way?
No, I actually cared about him more.
Yeah, that's true. I was like, I understand you now. Wow.
Yeah.
Not sexuality, but because because he's doing it for his heart was broken.
It's a really sad story.
He didn't seem less macho to me.
Well, he's an incredibly macho character if you're defining macho on the terms that you would think people would mostly be defining them on, right? Like, he's hyper violent and very, he's
an alpha.
He's an
alpha male.
It's an alpha male.
I didn't see him as less of an alpha male because he had a love affair with a man.
No, because his actions don't change, right? Like, he is still behaving in ways that people would think of as hyper masculine. And it doesn't have anything to do with his relationship. But whatever. People be homophobic. What are you going to do?
As Zach McGowan said, you just got to look at yourself, man.
Maybe ask that question to yourself.
Yeah. I think we also want to briefly mention just a fun thing about this fan community as we were exploring it and getting into it. There is a fanzine.
Yay!
So if you get into Black Sails as well, check it out. It's on Tumblr. Very cool.
blacksailzine.tumblr.com. An old school throwback of fandom. So that is fun. Okay. We've talked a lot. So it's time to get into our questions, our favorite time of the podcast. Is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
In an appropriate space for pirates and sailors, it's queer canon, baby. Fire the cannons.
Fire the cannons, exactly. And, the opposite side of the coin of this is if you gender swap the characters, would they be a couple? Nah, buddy.
Yeah, and also,
like it.
If you were going to gender swap Thomas and James, who's going to be the woman in this situation?
I mean, it wouldn't make sense for the story either way, because
I just feel like a woman would not have achieved the position of Thomas in that society.
I think you just sort of have to imagine that you're kind of flipping the Thomas and Miranda characters, right? In terms of their place in the story.
It wouldn't work, right? Because it just wouldn't work because one of the reasons why James is so in love with Thomas is because of his desire to change the world and make it better. And as sweet and lovely as Miranda is, she's not doing that.
I mean, she could have those ideas, but she wouldn't have the power that Thomas has in that situation, certainly. I mean, you could write it so that she's sort of espousing these ideas. And I mean, Thomas and Miranda have a lovely relationship. I guess you could make it where she's sort of powering this and he is taking actions on her behalf. And so she is the intellectual thrust of the relationship, in which case Flint could.
But, as Miranda exists, right? She's aligned. She is the alternate option, and he does start having an affair with her, and he doesn't choose her.
Right.
So it would seem to me that no.
All right. So why isn't it canon? It is.
It is. We're good.
You don't have to answer the queer baiting scale question because there ain't no queer baiting unless you ask Rupert Henry Jones.
Sure.
So I think
Rupert Henry Jones would give it a 5.
Yes.
If I'd only had substantially more screen time.
Okay, so I think we've done it justice now. What are we talking about next time, Kelsey?
Well, before we get to, do we have any wrap-up thoughts? I know we have talked a lot, but I do want to give space for any our wrap-up thoughts are it's good, watch it.
My wrap-up thoughts are, I love the show, watch it. Especially if you're someone who's been watching Our Flag Means Death and is like, oh, I'm into this whole gay pirates thing now. I've heard stuff about Black Sails. You should. Watch it.
Yeah. I just think there should be more pirate shows, 1. 2, I think there should be more gay pirate shows. And I think also 3, that there should be more gay characters on screen that aren't either tragically going to die, are not tragically depressed because they're gay, and also are not coming out and flagrantly signposting they're gay. I think there should be. I think it's happening. It's starting to happen. There's still a long way to go, but I think they should be written as complex human beings with, sort of diverse and exciting, interesting, fulfilling lives, and complicated, interesting, romantic and emotional and also platonic relationships as well. Like, they should be seen as and drawn as fully fledged human beings, not as tropes anymore. And I would like to see a lot more of that on television and film, please.
Amen.
You can't go wrong with a fully rounded character, honestly.
And I also would really like it if, like, straight people wouldn't feel threatened by this. But that is, you know, that's like hoping for world peace. I mean,
That's asking a lot, yeah.
That is also the goal. Less in control of our creators, but hopefully people are able to ask themselves those tough questions and get it together.
Exactly.
And just watch a narrative unfold and say, wow, that, you know, really came together.
All right. That's Black Sails, everybody. What are we talking about next time?
We're going to go back to a Let the Girls Kiss.
Yay.
We don't do enough of it, so this will be good. In anticipation of the Marvels, we will be talking about Captain Marvel.
that sounds exciting.
Yay.
I'll definitely give that a listen.
So,
Looking forward to it. Before we leave, do you have anything you'd like to plug, Clara?
Well, I do have a podcast. I have my own podcast, which Kelsey and Maddie were very, very kind enough to come on it. So you can also listen to that episode where we talk about fandom and fiction and transformative fandom. But it's a bit of on a hiatus at the moment because I actually am doing a master's in history. So that is called The Tales We Tell, and it's a podcast about women and gender in film, television and fiction. So please do head over. We've got a big back catalogue, and please do head over and have a listen and, you know, let me know what you think. And you can also find me on, I don't even know if I should say this anymore, but you can find me on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC.
I believe you mean X.
I mean, I'm also on Instagram, I'm on Threads, I'm on every social media channel now because I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So what's your handle on this?
Instagram, I'm Clara Jean the Jelly Bean. I chose it before any of this Twitter stuff went down. The Tales We Tell does have a Facebook page, and I'm known as Clara Cook on Facebook. And on Threads, I think I'm the same. I think I'm Clara Jean the Jelly Bean because that's an Instagram. It's a meta platform.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, you know, head over. I think I'm Clara Jean the Jelly Bean on Tumblr too. So I'm thinking I might have.
That's great. Keep it up. That's good branding.
I think I might have to go back to Tumblr or some other site.
Get on Tumblr. It's where all the fun is, especially now that the people had to empty out of Reddit for a bit. They've gone back over to Tumblr. So.
But yeah, so.
It's Wild Old West out there. No, but thanks for joining us, Clara. And yes, you have a great back catalog. So folks definitely
give it a listen.
That.
Thanks for coming. In the meantime, if you would like to reach out to us with comments, questions, concerns, we are at ltbkpod@gmail.com, and we are on Twitter, X, and Tumblr at ltbkpod. If you're enjoying the pod, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend. The next episode will be released in November of 2023.